We are back on MorningLine.
Church and state.
Indeed.
Yes.
Thank you. The conversation continued during the break with our guest. Samar Ali is with us. As we said at the beginning of the show, millions of conversations. The whole idea is, I guess, trying to create a dialogue, a common ground in this world we live in right now that is so broken. I mean, we're polarized. And so can we get, where do you want to start with in terms of specifics? How do you do that? You brought a lot of good, thoughtful people in to be involved with this. It's part of the Vanderbilt Project on Unity and American Democracy. That's where you are then at Vanderbilt now, right?
Yes.
Okay, and we've done shows on this before, and we talk about it. I mean, how do you do that? Where are you going? How do you approach it? Is there a different approach? I mean, we talk, oh, bring people together. Let's have focus groups. Let's say, well, how do you do this?
Yeah, well, unity does not mean 100% agreement.
Okay.
But here's the thing: 70% of Americans actually agree on almost everything, and so we're closer than we think we are. And I'm a mediator by trade, so at the intersection of all that work I'm doing equals mediation, really. And so I help people transcend divides and communities to transcend divides, to sort of think about, and you don't start with your differences, actually, you start with your commonalities, and you talk about what is it that we have in common. Do we have shared values? Do we want to have a shared future together? If we do, then let's talk about why we're so upset. That's when you say, let's talk about where we've been, where we are, where we want to go together. And that's really a social contract.
So you said 70% of Americans agree on most. I mean, what was the number?
Yeah, 70% of Americans agree on most things.
I think they probably do.
Yeah.
And then there's the key issues, whatever's in the news today. Abortion is certainly something that's divisive, and others. But 70%.
But even on that, more people agree than we think they do.
Okay. On abortion rights.
Yes,
okay.
That's right. That's right.
All right, LGBTQ.
It's how we're talking about it.
Some of those issues.
Yeah, it's how we're talking about it. I think it's getting into, it's the framing, and that's why the Twitter world and social media has changed how we communicate with each other, how we understand each other. There's a lot of miscommunication going on. There's a lot of confusion, and so we've got to get our bearings, and that's part of what we're doing with Millions of Conversations, which is a grassroots organization that's separate from the Project on Unity and American Democracy at Vanderbilt, but they are partners together. I co-chair also the Project on Unity and American Democracy, and I'm a research professor at Vanderbilt. And my research focuses on this issue. And that's really kind of getting into what is that people are really saying, what is it they're wanting to say, what are the different interests at play. We've got politicians, we have different stakeholders, we've got the government, we've got civil society, and we've got the private sector as well. And so putting all of that together, what we're realizing right now is we've got a trust deficit. So there's a trust deficit between Americans and each other, between Americans and democracy, and between Americans and government. So how do we actually build trust? What does that look like? And right now, what a lot of people are trying to do is to do it through elections.
Right.
Well, elections are zero-sum games. We need them. They're the heart of democracy. But how are we going about elections? How are we going about competition? If we don't trust the elections, we've got a major problem. So I think a lot of this is about trust and anchoring people back in, and way we address that is going back to basics. And we're all Americans. We're proud to be Americans. What does it mean to be prideful to be an American? And I think we need to discuss what does it mean to belong in America today, and how do we build consensus around a common identity that we are proud of.
Okay, well, let's just go to Georgia and look at Warnock and Walker.
Yeah.
All right, and Warnock ends up prevailing in that Senate race, but boy, more than 1 million people voted for Herschel Walker. Right. And those two are a lot different. Yeah. And you wonder, whenever a candidate wins, they say, I want to represent everyone, and I know they mean that, but the people on the losing side are angry, and many times people don't like to lose, and so they'll make up, mostly, in my opinion, completely bogus excuses that there was some kind of hanky-panky going on with the election process, and there's never ever any evidence of that. People just don't like to admit they lost. And to Herschel Walker's credit, he conceded. Class act on his part.
Yes,
okay,
definitely.
So, but what about that? You just see how different they are as candidates, and I guess the key on this is when you get into office, maybe Warnock will be there. I don't see compromise anymore. I don't see compromise. And I think that's at the heart sometimes of, you may have differences, but you have to sometimes give to get a little. It was 2 decades ago I was working in D.C. for Congressman Tim Penny, and he all of a sudden out of the blue just decided, I'm not running anymore. And he said back then, more than 2 decades ago, there's no longer any compromise. It's divisive. He thought it was divisive back then. I wonder what Tim thinks now.
I think we have to ask the question, why is it so divisive? And then it comes into what is the role of the American people to communicate that we're tired of it, and communicate it through how we're voting, how we're talking to candidates when they're coming through, etc., and to also not let candidates define who we are. I think that that's part of this, is like they're defining and shaping our narrative, whereas I think we should be defining and shaping our narrative. And I think that we vote, not just in the voting, but also in how we're responding to focus groups that we're or asked to be a part of, how we're talking about this in places of work, in places of worship.
So when you do all this, and you know, millions of conversations moves forward, is this something then that you hope takes hold with people who are running for office, that take into account what you do, and that's where tangibly we'll start seeing change? I mean, you can have these focus groups and talk about it. We can highlight it on programs like this. Where is it going to take root and start bringing change?
Yeah, I think it's about how we're sharing power with each other. I really think that a lot of it comes down to that and how we're communicating. So what we will do is we do a couple of different things on that. We're not only focused on the political election landscape, because we're like, we don't want to also mirror the problem, because America's more than our elections. And
it's amazing how things settle down in this country after the elections.
Yeah,
in a way, it's just all of a sudden it seems so, and then it goes away, and it's like, oh, all of a sudden it's back to business, and we're doing
common sense.
Common sense.
I think this is it. I think Americans, what we are known for, what we need to continue to be known for, is common sense and innovation as well. And so not for our politics, but quite frankly for our civil society and our private sector, and innovation that's being driven through the private sector, and really thinking about what is the role of public sector. For example, infrastructure. Do we need high-speed rail in Tennessee? When I said that 10 years ago, people laughed at me. I just came back from an overseas trip. There's high-speed rail everywhere. If we have high-speed rail in the state, for example, it's gonna be a game changer.
It would be awesome.
And you're gonna see rural communities and urban communities getting along better and engaging in a different way. But I was to answer your question. We will sit down with people who are running for office and talk to them about the impact the negative rhetoric has on our country, and we ask them in very specific ways to dial back some of the language, and that we do that with the candidates themselves and the teams around them. And additionally, because we know who they're targeting, we know the demographics they're targeting with negative rhetoric, we will target, or not even target, I should say, we will put out into social media positive messages to reach the same people.
Okay, because I mean, oh boy, for some of these elections of late, I mean, every other ad for a while there was just, when it came on, such negative.
Yeah, exactly.
But they're doing it obviously because they think it works,
and
right?
who's benefiting from it? What we say is who's benefiting from it is the hate industrial complex.
Okay, but it helps, if it helps them get them elected, they don't care, right?
Well, it might not continue to help get them elected.
Okay, that's where you need to push it and say, look, you may be doing this, but this is going to bite you in the butt later.
Exactly.
Does
exactly.
it? Does it?
I think in some instances it does. Yeah. And I think that the more and more people see that, the more we're like, okay, American people are getting tired of this. American people don't want to hate each other. And also, I think from a national security standpoint, we can only take so much polarization and still be functional globally. We have to be realistic about that.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like then, because of the way it is, until the change comes you're talking about, people are being elected and their constituents are saying, this is our stand, don't budge. So then they get to D.C. and they're both like, they promise their constituents, I'm not budging, that's where I come in with compromise. And they don't even listen to the other side. It's my way or the highway. And then you have a split Congress, and then you have special interest groups and all that money.
Yeah, all that money. And then you also have foreign interest coming in as well. And so through a number of different avenues. And so we have to have honest conversations with ourselves about where are we, and I don't think we need to get defensive about it. I think we need to have an honest conversation about where are we right now as America, as an American electorate, and where do we want to go.
All right, so you're founding member of the Millions of Conversations, right?
Yes.
So just give folks a little, before we talk about some of the other people you're working with, like historian John Meacham, who's awesome. A little more on your background.
Yes,
Just like
I grew up in Waverly.
You grew up in Waverly?
Yes.
Here. Okay, we've been spending a lot of time there because of the flood. You grew up in Waverly.
I was actually there that day.
Were you really?
Yeah,
just
it was one of the scariest days.
So you were in Waverly on that day?
Yes.
Okay, and so you grew up in Tennessee.
Yes.
And then since then,
native Tennessean.
And what puts you in this position? All the things that you've done.
And since then, I always have wanted to really help communities heal divides. So I was born to Palestinian and Syrian American immigrants. My
Probably
parents,
not a lot of them in Waverly.
Right. And I would go back to the Holy Land since the age of 3.
Okay.
And I would see the, remember the 90s saying, like, peace in the Middle East? Really sort of seeing why people were saying peace in the Middle East. And we're thinking about how do we heal the divides between Arabs and Jews and between Palestinians and Israelis, and how do we change the narrative that there is not just like one side and another side, but there's humanity. And really believing that. And that took me to live and learn from Archbishop Desmond Tutu in South Africa while he was doing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which led me to work and be mentored by Justice Edwin Cameron, who's now a retired Constitutional Court Justice in South Africa. And so they really kind of trained me in this work in democracy, human rights, and mediation. And then went and worked at a law firm.
Where'd you go to school?
Vanderbilt.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go on. And then you went to work. So you have a law degree?
I do.
Okay.
I do. And I focused on international law. I was doing cross-border transactions with a large law firm in Washington, D.C., Hogan Lovells. Justice Roberts ran the appellate practice there.
Okay.
And then I worked in the White House, in the Obama administration as a White House fellow. My portfolio was national security. Came back home. Worked with Tennessee Governor Haslam.
Okay, so there you've got a Democrat president, of course. You worked for a Republican governor here.
Yeah, and is helping put together with now Senator Haggerty the international strategy plan for growth in Tennessee around foreign direct investment and trade.
Okay.
And then from there, actually worked as a mediator to the Syrian conflict for almost half a decade, trying to help resolve that conflict.
When you say mediating, for instance, what?
Yeah, so mediating between different opposition groups. There was a while of where people thought that Assad was going to be replaced, who was going to be the government, that what was the negotiations process around that. Also in helping different groups who were in conflict with each other, but who were on the same page about being anti-ISIS, to work together to counter ISIS, of helping broker deals between Iraqi Kurds and Syrian Arabs and Syrian Kurds as well. Those are some of the deals that I worked on. I worked on some deals of trying to get people released as a mediator as well. And then from that, really felt like I was not tired, but I was thinking a lot about when I was, again, working at the White House, my portfolio was Homeland Security. I shadowed Secretary Napolitano. Some of this was about how do we take more preventative measures, and how do we ourselves as a nation in the United States not downward spiral into a civil war ourselves, and what are the measures that we need to take? And that led to, in part, millions of conversations.
What did you think of the insurrection?
I was heartbroken about it. And I felt like I was afterwards prayerful that we weren't going to turn it into another politicized event. I felt it was really important for people to understand that a crime had been committed on the people's house, and for us to depoliticize what had happened, and to come together again to really understand this is a wake-up call. Now, because of the research I do, I was shocked but not surprised. So because of the scenario mappings that I do, that was a potential scenario, because election violence and political violence are not concepts that are new to me. These are what I study.
Hopefully, because you study it in other countries. And we've certainly, I guess, had some, but nothing like that.
Well, we saw the signs, though. But now here's the thing. We do see the signs, but this is the thing, it's not inevitable. And so our problems in our country are not unique, but our solutions can be. We have an enormous amount of grit and institutional power and know-how and an entrepreneurial spirit, which can allow for us to pivot very quickly from negative to positive. And that's good news. So, but again, going back to shocked, I wasn't surprised, but I was shocked. still, because
Just a hard thing to watch. Listen,
it's horrifying.
let's take a quick break. This is really interesting. We've got another segment with our guest. We're going to take a break. Be back with more with Samar Ali right after this. Stay with us.